Hello, my name's Deborah Jones and welcome to my recorded session on leading and managing remote teams. I've been working with leaders and teams in a consulting and a coaching capacity now for over 15 years, and before that for a good 10 years, either being a member of a team or leading some of my own teams when I worked in financial services here in the UK. So today I'm recording this session for many of my clients and anybody else out there who knows me and is interested in listening for a good half an hour or so to help us think about what we need to do to lead and manage our teams well, now that we've all been thrust into this period of remote working. I'm talking to you at the end of March in 2020, just as the coronavirus crisis has hit over the last few weeks substantially us in Europe, and the majority of us now across the world are leading and managing our teams remotely because we have to socially distance, self-isolate, work from home. So welcome, and hopefully you will find this interesting. And for anybody out there who does know me, you might have spotted something slightly different about me. About 4 weeks ago, I lost my hair. So that's just another little challenge that I've been grappling with, and decided to, well, do the recording anyway, because what does hair matter, hey, when we're all facing much harsher, potentially more difficult situations. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen with you. I have a presentation that goes with this conversation, and might take a little bit of time to swap on over, but hopefully you will get to see that very soon. Okay, so what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover some foundations of what it means to be a good team leader, a good team manager. We're going to cover contracting and the concept of contracting and what to contract with your team about. We're going to look at trust. We're going to look at communication. We're going to look at channel protocols. So what kind of communication channels are you now using, and are there any rules around that? Are there any better channels for better types of conversations? Going to look at scheduling and what it means to keep a good diary across the team, and most importantly, how you're going to connect now that you're in remote places, how you're going to stay connected socially as individuals and as a team. So I talked a little bit about foundations. This will apply whether you are leading a team remotely or face-to-face. Being a great leader, being a great team manager is all about two things. It's about your attitude and it's about your actions. So it's about your mindset, how you think, what you think, and it's about what you do. And I really want to encourage you to start with that first one, that attitude, your mindset. You're going to have to be empathetic. You're going to have to build trust. It is of paramount importance now that you, as the leader of this team, role models the kinds of behaviors, the kinds of attitudes that you need to see across the team. Oh, just a quick note, you will have seen that we're not the only ones working remotely. Everybody's working remotely, and if leaders of G7 countries can run a country from home, then so can we. We need to take inspiration from this and smile a little bit as well. We know that Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, has been running his country quite successfully over the past 2 weeks or so since he's been self-isolating. And Boris Johnson, now our Prime Minister in the UK, is also socially distancing, self-isolating actually, because he's got coronavirus, and running the UK. from 10 Downing Street in a room on his own. So we think. So yes, this is just a nice picture from a Twitter journalist, Alvin Lum, who was part of this coronavirus pandemic G7 meeting about a week ago now. So that's his. So let's start with trust. Many of you may have heard of the author Stephen Covey. Wrote a lot of great work about teams, about leadership, and in particularly, I liked his work on trust. And in a nutshell, what we know about trust is that the greater the trust between individuals across the team, the faster you'll work together, and the lower it will cost you. It will cost you less. It will cost you less in terms of time, and it will cost you less in terms of, well, resources, money, whatever resources mean to you. So as the leader of the team, building trust is, and a psychologically safe space to work is one of the most important jobs for you right now. Without trust, teamwork is all but impossible. Trust is about having the confidence that your leader, that your manager has trust in you, and that your peers, your teammates also trust you, and that you trust them. That everybody's intentions are good, and there's no reason to be protective or careful around what you say, how you behave, and what you do. In essence, trust is about being able to be yourself with one another, and being able to be vulnerable with one another, being able to ask questions, being able to admit mistakes, being able to make requests for help. All of that vulnerability, all of that is mixed in with trust, and trust is going to be the keystone of your team moving forward. Without it, you're going to run into trouble. So I really would take some time and energy in thinking about trust, and thinking about whether or not you've really got it in your team. You've really got it between you and the people in your team that you're leading and managing. When we are stressed as individuals, and now is a time when people will be feeling stressed, they'll be feeling uncertain, we have a tendency to go within ourselves. We have a tendency to withdraw and not trust. So even more so now, building that trust, building that sense of certainty and confidence, psychological safety, it's been called as well, is crucially important for you as a team leader. So I want you to have a think about that. Look for some of the signs yourself. Are you trusting? Or are you actually thinking, are they online? Are you checking up on people? Are you sending off 1 million emails a day? Do you notice whether or not people are online or not? You're going to have to resist the instinct to want to control. You're going to have to trust yourself that work is getting done, that people have their best intentions and positive intent, in order for other people to trust each other and to trust you. So, moving on, little word about contracting. Anybody who's ever been any team coaching with me knows that a good place to start is contracting. And what do I mean by contracting? I mean by agreeing with one another, how you're going to work together now. And many of you will have already been set up on video conferencing channels such as the one I'm using right now, Zoom or Microsoft Teams, Skype. You might even be using FaceTime, I don't know. Whatever you can use to get together and be able to see one another is going to be the best channel to use for having a contracting conversation. And in your contracting conversation, there are various things that you need to focus on. So you need to consider team purpose. Every team that is a real team needs a shared purpose, an agreed shared purpose, an idea that across the team we are all doing the same thing. We are all working towards the same goals. So you need to check in on purpose, and now is a good time to do it. Now you're all working remotely. You can do this by just going around asking everybody for their point of view. You can spend a bit of time on it. You can ask people to write it down, have a think individually. If you're using Zoom, you can put people into breakout rooms and use the software for individuals to have either a chat in pairs or in smaller groups to talk about team purpose, and come back together. You also need to consider your values and behaviors as a team. So it's a good place, again, it's a good time to just dust off what matters to us as a team, and what has that changed now that we're going to be working remotely with one another. So what do we really, really care about? What gets our goat? What's really important? It could be being on time. Now that you're having remote meetings and everybody's managing their diaries slightly differently, being on time might be more important than it was when you were working together in the office. It could be honesty, it could be frequency of communication, it could be having some time to be creative, it could be quality of the work, results, it could be service and what your team does for other people, for your customers, for your clients out there. You will know what behaviors and values matter to yourselves as a team. Now's a good time to dust that off and have that conversation. You also need to talk about the types and purpose of meetings that you're going to have. You need to talk about the frequency of those meetings, and you need to talk about how you are going to communicate. So we're going to come on to all of these different things later on in the presentation. You're going to need to talk about the channels that you're going to be using and what types of channels are going to be used for which type of communication. And finally, you're going to need to talk about how you're going to connect socially. So social time used to happen quite naturally in the office. It used to happen over the desk if you had an open plan office, or at the coffee machine, or the photocopier, or just having a chat in the corridor, or the restaurant. It's not going to happen like that now. So how is it going to happen? Connecting socially as a team is going to be crucial. So it's your job as the team leader to make sure that people are connecting socially, and you're going to do something on a regular basis. But I would suggest that you talk about it with your team as well in this contracting conversation. So let's move on to a little bit of a question for you. So now's the time, if we were in a workshop together, I'd say get out the post-it notes, get out the pens, have a minute or so to yourself and think about what is your natural leadership and management style. How have you been leading? How have you been managing your team? Just have a little bit of a think now and write down a few things. And write down this next question, which I'd encourage you to add thoughts to as we go along in the recording. What may need to change now in your style, now that you're leading a remote team? You might already have some answers or some ideas. Hopefully you'll have some more by the end of this recording. Okay, so let's move on to communication. Some good reminders about communication. Whenever I run a communication workshop, I always ask people to do the tin can exercise, tin can and string exercise, which is really about learning about good communication and the quality of the connection, that wire between the two cans, and whose responsibility it is, whether it's the receiver's or the sender's responsibility to maintain the quality of that connection. I've had lots of conversations with people who really think it's the responsibility of the receiver of any communication to attend to that connection, to attend to the quality of that connection, because, you know, the speaker, the sender of the communication, they just send it. They just pick up the phone, they just whack off an email, say their words, share their words, ask their questions, share their messages. The responsibility is on the sender to decipher, to understand. Well, things have changed, and even if that was the case, which I don't fully believe it is or ever was, now definitely the responsibility as the sender of any messages is on you. The responsibility to attend to the quality of that connection is on you, more so because you are working remotely. You can't see people, you can't see all of those cues that you used to just use naturally to understand whether or not your communication had actually been correctly understood, or, let me change that word, correctly understood as you perhaps meant it to be understood, because we all make meaning slightly differently. That's a topic for another day. But back to that, you don't have tone of voice, you don't have body language, you don't have facial expressions to go on. Little bit so on the video, but it's still different from actually being face to face. So you really are going to have to up your game when it comes to communicating, to make sure that you're getting across the messages that you really want to get across. So let's just talk about frequency of communication as well, and the types of communicating you're going to have to do now with your team. I would suggest on a regular basis, you want to be having team meetings, and you want to be catching up individually with the people in your team too. In these first few weeks, I'd go for once a week. I really would, just as you're getting into a rhythm. So you're going to have some team meetings, and you're going to have individual one-to-ones. The team meetings, you'll have contracted, hopefully, with your team about how you're going to run those team meetings, what channel you're going to use, what software, etc. you're going to use. I'd really think about what you put into those team meetings and how long they are. There's a few bullets here on this slide to say that I would suggest that at least you are sharing context with people. So you're giving an update on what's important in the organization, in your department, in your team today or over the next few days. You're giving an update and getting an update on critical activities. What's the work of the team? What is it that is happening, and getting an update from your team members, but not the creeping round the table, sort of creeping death updates of everybody's to-do lists that perhaps team meetings may have been like before. Just get a quick update on critical activities from people. You can go through more individual action lists on your one-to-ones. You want to be hearing about risks, especially any risks to critical services that your team is providing right now. You want to be giving people the opportunity to make requests, and you want to, of each other and you want to be giving people the opportunity to ask questions. And finally, you need to be setting actions as a team as well. So if there are any outstanding actions, things that need to move, things that you need to make progress on as a team this week, set those actions. And as a reference here to Dr. Brené Brown's task checklist. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Brené Brown is an American professor at the University of Houston, and she is fabulous. She's a fabulous leader, researcher, speaker, author, and this task checklist that she uses is an accountability and success checklist. She published it in her book, Dare to Lead, and she uses it in her own business. It's really easy, it's really simple, and I advocate you using it. I use it with my teams. So T stands for the task. Who owns the task? A stands for authority. Does the person who you're giving the task to have the authority to be held accountable to deliver that task? S stands for set up for success. Are you set up for success? Do you as a team agree that whoever's got this action has the resources, the time, and the capability to deliver this action? And the C stands for, what does the C stand for? The C stands for checklist. So make sure that you've got a checklist of all the actions that need to happen and what needs to be done in order to deliver that action. So moving on to one-to-one meetings, I would spend, again, at least 30 minutes, I'm saying 40 minutes or so here on a one-to-one with your team member. You may well be into the hour and a half, and that's fine. Certainly in this early days, if you can afford the time, I'd give everybody at least an hour a week. This schedule suggests 40 minutes. You can play with that. Spend a few minutes, 5 minutes here catching up. Spend 20 minutes on concerns, issues, workload. Ask the individual about their experience of working in the team remotely. Is it working for them? How are they experiencing that? Spend a good 20 minutes on getting feedback from your colleague as well. How are they feeling? How are they getting on with their work? You need to check in with them, obviously, from a personal perspective, especially if anybody is feeling sick or has anybody in their family that is currently sick as well. If everything's okay, you need to be finding out how they are feeling and what you can do to help them. How are they finding your leadership and management style? So this is very much about you listening and listening to them. And make sure that obviously you're spending a good chunk of time, I'm saying 5 minutes here, it might be longer, on actions and next steps with your individuals as well. So another key part of communication and communicating as a leader is communicating effectively. So you need to go back to your attitude. You need to go back to your trust. You need to go back to your empathy. You need to go back to your positive intent and really channel that yourself. You need to think about the words that you are using, because these words are going to be landing in a slightly different way now. You haven't got that immediate opportunity to correct what you say or to embellish it with other ways of making meaning, you know, with your face or the tone of voice or just quickly saying it another way, especially if you're writing and communicating with people over email or chat or instant messenger. Any written communications, you've got this one-off chance of your words landing either the way that you meant them to land or not. So you need to think about the words you're using, and I would suggest don't rely on the types of communication channels, the types of chats that occur at the same time. So this is synchronous conversation. So chat, instant messenger, you know, those chat functions where you're literally just talking at one another really quickly. Don't rely on that channel, those channels as your primary channel. I would very much rely on email or Google Docs, any kind of sort of sharing backwards and forwards channel, where you give people the opportunity to read your message, have a think about your message, understand your message, make some decisions about what it is that how they want to say or how they want to reply, and then come back to you. So this is very much in an asynchronous way. So a conversation that is happening not at the same time. Make that your default, and that might be email for you. We're going to have a look at channels in a moment, so you know, you'll be able to talk with your team about what the best channel is going to be for you. Because being a good writer is also part of being a good leader. and you're going to be writing a lot more now perhaps than you did before. But the quality of your words, the quality of your writing will have a huge impact on your effectiveness, on the effectiveness of how you communicate. So, looking at channels, one of the things that you will have is a lot of channels. You might be having a lot of channels open on your desktop. You might be having your phone pinging off at you at the same time. You might be having your phone ringing. All of a sudden, you've got multiple channels of communication to manage as a team. So it might be in your company or in your department, there's some guidelines or some rules on which channels are best to use for which types of communication. If you've got guidelines, dig them out, use them. If you haven't, create some of your own with the team. So make a list, first of all, of the tasks that your team needs to do together. This is just an example here on the left-hand side of some of the tasks that a team might need to do. You'll probably have at least 15, maybe 20 or so different tasks. You might have more. You might have 30, 40, 50 different tasks, different things that your team does together. So make that list, and then make a list of all the digital channels that you use. So make a list of, whether that be email, phone, video chat, using collaborative document software, text, WhatsApp, instant messenger. And then have a think about assigning the best channel to that type of activity. This is just an example from me. It might be different from you. So then have a look at some rules of thumb here from me. They're based on remote working research, and they suggest that if you're writing a sentence, use that synchronous, that instant type of conversation, that instant type of communication channel, chat or instant messenger. If you're writing a paragraph, use an email. If you're writing more than 3 paragraphs, maybe an email, but also maybe a phone call too to explain. If you've got more than 5 questions, try a video call so that people can ask you questions and you can answer them as you go along. And if you know that that explanation is going to be longer than 5 minutes, then seriously consider using some slides to assist your communication. Slides help in many ways. They help to sort of make it clear, really, exactly what it is that you're trying to get across. And they help keep you organized. They also help people keep engaged. They really do help with that level of focus that you want people to have. So consider using some slides. And finally, you're going to need to decide on your default channel of communication. So what is the one channel over and above everything else that you're going to use as a team to communicate key messages? Is it email? Is it phone? You guys will decide for yourselves. So, little word about timing and scheduling. So it might be that you're working across time zones in your team. If you are, you're going to need to take those into consideration. Where are your team? Which countries are they operating in? When are they getting up? When are their core hours? What are the time zones that you're working in? If you don't have to worry about time zones, it might be now that everybody has a slightly different view of their expected working hours. So are you all working 9 to 5? Are some of you working 8 to 6? Are you working in shifts? You're going to need to know what are the expected hours of every person. Are they all the same or not? You're going to have to consider rules around when and how you're going to be offline. Is it okay to be offline? I'm suggesting it should be okay to be offline. You're going to need to run errands. Sometimes people might get sick. They're going to have kids at home now with the schools being off, and they might need to have set times in the day to look after their children. So what are the expectations? You need to talk about that, and you need to define that as a team. You need to think about a do not disturb time. Are you having one? Does each separate person have their own? Or are you having a do not disturb time for everybody in the team? Have a think about that too. Do not disturb times could be used for quiet times, for creativity, for thinking times. And you're going to need to know when people are doing that kind of activity so that you're not interrupting their flow, so that they can be as productive as you need them to be. Finally, as a team, how do you know when something is urgent and how do you respond? Have you got service level agreement, or SLAs, as the acronym there is referring to? So again, have a think about that. Do you need to respond to people on an email the same day, or can it go over to the next day? Do you need to respond to somebody on chat or a Teams message within an hour? What are your rules around whether or not you know something is urgent, and also how you have to respond and in what time? Moving on to loneliness. So now we're working remotely and we're at home, either on our own or with our immediate families. We're only a week in here in the UK, so it's pretty fresh, but loneliness is a real concern, and it's a concern that as a leader of a remote team, you need to be aware of. Many remote workers feel lonely at times, and in a remote working study of just last year, 2019, by a company called Know Your Team in the States, they refer to 20% of remote workers saying that loneliness is the biggest issue when it comes to their remote working. You don't hear people talking about how lonely they are, and that's because loneliness can be quite stigmatized. Sometimes you're considered a bit of a loser, or being a bit weak if you're lonely, which is really awful. But I think it's kind of normal that people can think that. I was watching a great TEDx video by an American professor, John Cacioppo, professor of psychology and behavioral neuroscience at the University of Chicago. And he talks about how loneliness is not just a sad condition for a social species such as ours. He talks about how dangerous it is. The brains of social species have evolved to respond to being lonely in a self-preservation mode, in a self-protect mode, and that means that we have an away response. We protect ourselves and we defend ourselves more when we're feeling lonely. And this can prevent us from reaching out to others, and it can prevent us from collaborating with others just at a time when we need to be doing that. So how are we going to tackle loneliness? By having those regular meetings, yes, making sure you have your team meetings, making sure you have your one-to-one meetings, but by also engineering social connection across your team. Don't underestimate how important those face-to-face meetings used to be. You're going to have to get intentional about this now. You're no longer having those opportunities to talk over the desk or in the corridor. And for anybody who's out there who's kind of frowning on socializing and thinking that, you know, it's all about performance, it's all about results. Research has shown that individuals who spend 15 minutes socializing have an increase of 20% in their performance over their peers who don't socialize with one another. So if we want that extra 20% of performance, we've got to attend to the social connection as well. So think about your channels. What channels are you going to use to socialize over? Are you going to have a dedicated non-work channel? Is it a chat channel? Is it a video channel? Is it at a certain time of the day, of the week? Is it a Slack channel? What does your team want to do? Again, you will have talked about this in contracting. Think about it. This is about socializing though. So this is not about work. So this is about having a coffee. This is about having a chat. Maybe you're having a beer or a glass of wine at the end of the week, playing a game. Some of my teams are already getting together and pulling out team games and just getting to know one another, sharing stories, sharing photos, sharing kids' pictures, sharing real kids. Have you got a child in the background who, you know, you want to sort of get together, pet stories, sharing good times. That's the most important thing. That's the key to socially connecting. You could also consider having a buddy system. So actually specifically buddying up people in your team with one another. So you're pairing them up to mentor one another, to coach one another, but as well as that, just to talk to one another. It might seem quite prescriptive to pair people up, but if a human being's natural tendency is to withdraw when they're feeling stressed, then they're going to be feeling a little bit stressed and a bit withdrawn right now. It's your job as a team leader to make sure that people are connected. So it might seem a little bit fake at the beginning, but I would really encourage you to do that. Okay, so finally, moving on. Top tips for leading and managing a remote team. Empathize. Think about your empathy. If you're not sure what somebody meant, think positive intent. Be the role model, be the leader, be the change that you want to see. Show leadership in how you behave. Contract with your team. Get everybody on board. Talk to one another about it. Don't rely just on chat and instant messenger. Rely on video, rely on email. Pick a channel that's going to work for you. Write things up as you go along. So document decisions, document conversations that you're having as across the team. Pay attention to how you're connecting socially, as we've just talked about, and most importantly, don't expect everybody to transition into remote working at the same time and in the same way. We're all going to be coping with this differently, and that's okay. You too, think about whether or not you need a buddy, a friend, a coach, somebody to talk to, and make sure that you give yourself the same amount of attention as you're also giving your team. So I would encourage you now at the end of this recorded webinar, to have a think about your top 3 takeaways from what I've talked to you about today. What are the 3 top things that are standing out for you now that you're going into being leading and managing your remote team? And also, what are the 3 most important things you need to do now? Take a moment, please. Write them down. Stick them on a Post-it. If you're like me, behind my screen, I've got Post-it notes everywhere. Take a deep breath. Hopefully, you've picked up some ideas now as to how to move forward. Center yourself and feel calm. You're going to have to be the one that role models the calm, finds the courage, builds the team, keeps spirits up. So I'm wishing you all the best luck in the world. Hopefully you have found this useful today. Thank you for joining me. Stay well. I'm sending all my best wishes for you and your families to stay healthy during this break out of COVID-19 and this lockdown period. And if anybody would like a chat about how best to lead and support your teams, please do get in touch with me. I'd be really, really happy to help. So thank you very much for joining me today, and all my best wishes.